Okay, thank you everyone for joining. This is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation. Today is June 25th, 2023. We are proposing the creation of a common secular government for the people of Israel and Palestine based on a democracy, based on a common parliament, which is the legislative branch, a common president and vice president, which is the executive branch, and a common judicial branch equal to Palestinians and Israel. One reason we need a common government is because currently we do not have a single legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. The Israeli government is not a legitimate government in the area of Israel, Palestine, because it is not elected by the Palestinians. In other words, the Palestinians are precluded from electing the government, and they have to comply with Israeli laws, and they have to comply with Israeli system, with the Israeli system, even though they are not, they are precluded from voting for the Israeli government. Therefore, the Israeli government is not a legitimate government in the area of Israel, Palestine, from the river to the sea. The Palestinian governments are not legitimate governments either, because first of all, they haven't had an election for many years. And even if they did have the election, they are not elected by the Israeli people. They're only elected by Palestinians. Like I said, they haven't had an election. So we do not have a legitimate government in Israel, Palestine at this time, and we haven't had one for many years. We are proposing the creation of a legitimate secular democracy for the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, from the river to the sea. But we do not propose the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. That may seem like a contradiction because I just said that they are not legitimate, but we do not call for their dismantling for the simple reason that it is an impossibility to dismantle the Israeli and the Palestinian government. So we have a proposal for a common government that would exist simultaneously, independently of the Israeli and the Palestinian government. You can read our constitution at ipconfederation.org. It's in 3 languages, English, Hebrew, and Arabic. And it explains how the common government will function, how the common government will be created, what are the 3 branches of the common government, of the 3 branches of the government, and how long they will function, and how often elections will take place. So it goes into a lot of details. Like I said, you can see it at ipconfederation.org. You can also read the frequently asked questions. My name is Joseph Avasar, and and you can see my you can see my email is josephavassar@gmail.com. Send me your comments. I am getting comments both before and after the simulations. I am very appreciative, and I respond to each and every comment that is being sent to me. Today we have a guest, a special guest. His name is Yoram Peri. Yoram Peri received his PhD from the London School of Economics He is a former political advisor to the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and he is a professor of political sociology and communication in the Department of Communication at Tel Aviv University, and a former editor-in-chief of the Israeli daily Davar. Professor Peri has held numerous prestigious positions at the U.S. Institute of Peace, the American University's School of International Service, Harvard University, Dartmouth College, the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies in Tel Aviv University, and the Department of Communication at the Hebrew University. Professor Peri has published extensively on Israeli society, media, and politics. Among his publications are Generals in the Cabinet Room, The Assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and Between Battles and Ballots, Israel's Military in Politics. In the last decade, he was the chair and the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at the University of Maryland. Very impressive resume, indeed. On July 9, we will have a debate. I will be debating a person by the name of Yoram Sheftel, who is very well known on the right in Israel. He's a lawyer, and we will debate the issue of whether Zionism is good for Israel. I had a meeting with Yoram Peri before. He told me that Yoram Sheftel is not the best representative of Zionism, but I don't know if there is such a thing as the best person who represents Zionism. But I know that Yoram Sheftel is very articulate. By the way, the debate will be in Hebrew with English, simultaneous English translation. On July 23rd, we will have another debate with Professor Oren Iftahel, some of you may remember him, and Dr. Tabet Abu Ras, Land for All. They have a different vision for a confederation. They call it a confederation, and I will be debating them on what is the best vision to make peace with Israel and Israel-Palestine. Going on August 6th, we will have Professor Daphna Golan. She is a sociologist. She teaches human rights at the Faculty of Law at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and the co-founder of B'Tselem. Many of you are familiar with that organization. You can see her picture here. It says, "Enough with the occupation, enough." So she should be a very interesting guest. On August 20th, we will have a simulation with Morton Klein. He is the president of the Zionist Organization of America. And like I said, we are inviting people with different points of views to discuss the idea of a common government to make peace. And then on September 3rd, we will have attorney Walid Abu Tayyeh, who is running to be the mayor of Jerusalem. Jerusalem during in the last 75 years, or maybe 100 years, or even more, never had a Palestinian mayor, and I think it's about time. And to have a Palestinian mayor, he could unite the city. On November 1st, we will have a giant billboard in central Tel Aviv from November 1st to November 30th that basically says a Jewish state is bad for Jews. And the purpose of having this billboard is to stimulate a discussion in the Israeli society about whether or not a Jewish state is capable of giving peace to the Jewish people. And so this giant billboard will be on for 30 days, and I already sent solicitation requests for donations, and any donation is appreciated. We had many previous participants. This is a list of many of them. Noam Chomsky appeared in our simulation twice, and he actually endorses, and he recorded a video endorsing our formula for peace. We invite many people. These are some of the people that we invited that did not come. Many of them have rejected our invitation, but most of the people that you see here on the list have not responded to our invitations. And the reason I bring this up is because it is very easy to be pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinians, but it is much more difficult to struggle with a peace proposal. And we think that our peace proposal is excellent. And we're inviting people to, just like we have today with Yoram Peri, is to tell us what's wrong with it. The simulation will take 120 minutes today. We will have several segments, and which will be followed by 5 minutes. Each segment takes 5 minutes, and Professor Peri will be asked to opine on each segment that he just saw. And then we will have a conversation and question and answer with Yoram Peri, and then closing remarks. We have a video that explains our vision for peace, and it takes 2 minutes, and I will play.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we will be simulating today what we just saw in the video. But I'd like to take a pre-simulation survey from the participants that are here in the simulation. Please vote. At this time, do you support a common government for Israel-Palestine? Either yes or no. I'm going to give it another minute for people to vote. I know that there are more participants than people voted. So if you want, it's not going to bite you if you vote, okay? And it's fun. And no one knows how you voted, so please vote. Okay. All right, so publish the vote, please. Okay, so 22 out of 25 voted yes, that's 88%. And 3 out of 25 voted no, that's 12%. And hopefully, and we will conduct the same survey at this end of the simulation and we'll see if there is a change. Just that Professor Peri, that you should know, many of the people that are voted have participated already and they're familiar with the concept. So that's why you see such a high vote, yes vote. It doesn't mean that if we take the same survey in Israel, Palestine, we'll get the same result. For sure, no. Now, the objective of the simulation is to show how a common government will make peace. We are not anti-Israel or anti-Palestine, and Professor Peri is not the speaker of the IPC. He was invited to stress test the IPC. I had a conversation with him about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, and we had a conversation, and I think he understands what it's about. And we will see what his views are, and we are going to challenge his views. We will have a rigorous discussion, but respectful. Let's not call each other names and attack each other on a personal level. It's been done in the past, and people they send me emails that they don't like to be attacked on a personal level. Unfortunately, we had the speakers being attacked. We don't do that. That's not acceptable to attack a person for his views and to attack him on a personal level. We want to have a free and honest discussion, and we do not want to intimidate anyone by attacking him or her on a personal level. That includes the speaker, and that includes the audience when we speak to each other. We will ask Professor Peri to judge our plan on these criteria. Could the IPC formula make peace? Is the IPC formula implementable? And we will ask him if the answer is no, why not? And is there a downside? If we create the common government, is there a downside to the Israeli or the Palestinian society or their governments? But we will ask Professor Peri to be fair. To judge us not based on perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. We cannot achieve perfection on anything, particularly not on Israel-Palestine, on making peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's not really fair to say, well, it's not a perfect plan. But we ask Professor Peri to judge us, what's the alternative? What do the Israeli and the Palestinian governments offer in terms of peace that is better than what we are offering? We can show many legislation to demonstrate how a common government could make peace. We cannot do that in an hour or an hour and a half. So what you see is just the tip of the iceberg, but we're asking you to look at the big picture, to avoid technical arguments. And most importantly, while this is not a lecture, this is a simulation. So therefore, we're asking you to refrain from comments during this simulation. But we are encouraging you to ask questions. Questions are perfect. So simulation is a model that mimics the operation of an existing or proposed system. That's what we are doing. We are mimicking a future plan. And we're asking you to keep your comments to the end. So how does this plan fly is a legitimate question, but I don't like planes because they cause pollution. That's a comment. Keep that to the end, or keep that. People violate that in every simulation, and I am guilty of that myself. But let's try to be focused and deal with the substance and ask specific questions. And then at the end, we will have our comments, or you can put your comments at the on the chat. The whole simulation is based on the acceptance of these assumptions. Okay. So if you haven't paid attention up to now, please pay attention now. These are the assumptions. That we held online elections for the last 3 months, okay? So let's assume that today the election has been completed and it lasted 3 months, not 1 day and not 1 week, but 3 months. That the election allowed 14 million people, with the exclusion of minors, of course, but 14 million people to vote. That 5 million people actually voted. That 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israelis voted. That the president received 1.5 million votes. You will have to assume, for the purpose of this simulation, I'm not trying to be the real president. I'm not even qualified. But for the purpose of the simulation, you will have to assume that I, Joseph, have been elected as the president of the common government by 1.5 million votes, and a Palestinian lady was elected by 1.3 million votes. She will be the vice president, and according to the Constitution, I will rotate with her in 2 years. I will become vice president, and she will become the president, and we will each have constitutional duties during the time that I am the president and vice president, or she is the president or vice president. You will also have to assume, for the purpose of this simulation, that 300 parliament members were elected, that each parliament member represents a district. Doesn't represent the Palestinian people or the Israeli people, but represents his district or her district. The district is of 47,000 people. That district could be exclusively Israelis or exclusively Palestinian or a mixed district. Many of the districts will be mixed. So my first question to you, Professor Peri, are you willing to accept these assumptions? Professor Peri?
He's muted. You have to unmute, Professor.
Right, here we are. So I started by saying thank you very much, President Avissar, for inviting me to the simulation. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate your efforts to pursue the peace in the Middle East and the efforts that you put in this project. I accept the assumptions, but I really want to start with 3-4 sentences, not more than that, before we go into the details. And they are that, generally speaking, I support anyone who is willing to pursue peace in the Middle East. Whatever project, program, vision he or she have. That's number one. Number two, personally, I prefer a confederation of 3 groups: Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, because I believe that there are 3 nations, the Jews, the Palestinians, and the Jordanians. So I prefer such a confederation. But a confederation of 2 is better than nothing. Number 3, the point is that the option or the probability to get to that stage of having peace is really there. It exists. Contrary to what very many people in Israel, mainly Jews, but also Palestinians, think today. It is possible. It is possible. What we need is really political urge, political will to do that. And that doesn't exist today. Unfortunately, it is we moved even back compared to where we were a year, 2 years ago, definitely to the 90s. This particular proposal could help in reaching an agreement, but again, we are far away today from that situation. Regarding the proposal itself, I read very carefully the entire paper, and I see there a mixture of two very different elements. Some are wonderful general concepts, principles about democracy, liberalism, pluralism, equality, really wonderful. And the others are very specific elements or articles, which some of them are wrong or are not needed in such a beautiful document. And if we have time, I will be able to show the difference between the ones that are really excellent and I fully support, and others that I don't agree with, or I think that can be taken out. They don't add to the general impression of the document. So these are my opening remarks, and then I'm ready to go into details if you want.
Okay, are you willing? Do you see the realistic possibility of creating a common government with 300 parliament members and a president and vice president, independent and separate from the Israeli and the Palestinian government?
Theoretically, it is implementable, but it's really theoretical. In practical meaning, I cannot see that it's not plausible in the near future. We are so far away from it that I don't, even if you put the money that is needed and the effort that you do and the publication and the propaganda, if that's the right word, and I don't see that in the near future. So
why not? Why not?
Because one of the major reasons regarding the Jews is that it takes into account the fact that a Palestinian state has to be established. In a way, the Confederation smoothed this issue, but a Palestinian state has to be created. And I don't see today too many Israelis, particularly not in the political level, that are deciding what the future of Israel will be, that will accept that. Particularly today, we are living under the most extreme right-wing nationalist, racist, religious, fanatic, messianic government that was ever created. And the vast majority of the members of the government, very large majority within the Knesset, believe that Israel should be the state only of the Jews. So to talk to them about the independent Palestinian state, even if it is mitigated with the Confederation, they will not accept it. And therefore, I think that it's not realistic in the near future. It doesn't mean that I say stop your efforts to try and explain your program, your ideas to the Israelis, but we are far away from it. And as I said, we are today further away than we were 20 years ago.
But whether they accept it or not is irrelevant, because the election will take place regardless of whether there is an acceptance by anti-peace elements. In other words, I'm asking you to look specifically at the assumptions. Is it possible to create an election platform and to allow 14 million people to vote? That calls for a yes or no answer.
Oh, you can do that, but I don't think that 5 million people will vote. 3 million Palestinians,
Well,
2 million Israelis. I think that only very few will really be involved in elections today. Maybe
Okay.
in 5 or 10 years there will be 2 million. Not today. I'll
Okay.
give you an example.
What is the basis upon which you make that analysis that 5 million people will not vote? What is
I understand the question. Let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, or maybe a little more, 20 odd years ago, I was the president of the New Israel Fund, which still exists, a group, an NGO that worked to strengthen Israeli democracy. When I became the president, we started a very interesting project. We called it Signing Again. And we asked people to sign the Declaration of Independence in Israel. We approached almost 1 million people who were ready, who were ready to sign and did sign. And then we went to the Knesset and we asked the Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, the leader of the opposition, President Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the chairman of the Knesset to sign. And I have a picture with me of the three signing this declaration. Today, if you ask Netanyahu, he wouldn't sign it. Today, if you ask the president of the Knesset, he wouldn't sign it. And this was the Declaration of Independence. It didn't talk about Palestinians, about independent Palestinian state. It spoke about it mentioned the beautiful values of democracy and Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. So this is an example, a clear example that we have moved back, several steps back, and therefore I don't see in the near future 2 million people, Israelis, supporting. Now, on the other hand, I'll tell you something else. What I've learned in my many years of studying Israeli politics, that the 5 major developments that shaped Israel's structure, nature, institutions were not accepted, not forecast or foreseen. The first one was, for example, the mass immigration from North Africa in the early 50s. No one thought that this will create the major split in Israel between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. The second one was 67. No one thought a day before the war that the results, the outcome of the war will become the major issue in Israeli politics, namely the future of the territories, relations with Palestinians. The third one was the collapse of the Soviet Union. No one accepted that within a year or two, there will be a growth of 20% of the Jewish population in Israel, of about 1 million Jews who came from Russia and the Soviet Union, and change Israeli society. For example, this is just a funny, not a funny, but a joke, almost a joke, that the entire musical scene in Israel has changed because of them. When they came to Israel, the joke was that everyone who comes from the Soviet Union has his violin box with him, and those who do not have violin box are the pianists. Now, today there are hundreds of orchestras in Israel which are manned by Russian Jews, former Russian Jews. So the most important developments in Israel, I won't go into details to the other two, the most important ones were not accepted, were not perceived, no one thought about it. And therefore, I don't believe in a linear, logical development. Everything might happen. Did you think yesterday that Prigozhin will try and fight against the elite in Russia? And in Israel, it's even more so. So I cannot, the conclusion is that I would never forecast developments in Israel more than the 5, 6, 7 years ahead of us.
All right. For purposes of this simulation, you will need to accept those assumptions.
Sure.
That's real. Okay. I'm not going to argue with you.
Sure.
That they are real, that they are, and we had other experts who said that they expected to have a much higher percentage of the population voting. So just for your information, I believe that one day of war, full-fledged war between Gaza and Israel is cost over $100 million. With $100 million, all of these assumptions and more could become realistic. But we'll go on. This is a simulation. We need people to participate in the simulation. Therefore, we need people to act. So I need volunteers to be Prime Minister of Israel, Palestinian Authority, and Hamas leader. Do we have a volunteer to act as Prime Minister of Israel? Please speak up.
I can be Prime Minister if nobody else wants it.
Okay, Giacomo. Okay, do we have a Hamas leader or do we have a Palestinian Authority? I need a volunteer for Palestinian Authority and I need a Hamas leader.
If no one wants to be PA, I'll be PA.
Okay. And do we have a Hamas leader? Is Sean here? I need a Hamas leader. Okay, you can come up later. I
saw Sean before. I don't know.
Okay.
Joseph, I can act as Hamas leader. This is Zohar.
Oh, okay, terrific. Thank you. All right, so you'll have to assume the personality of that leader. You're no longer Zohar, you're not Charles, you're not Giacomo. You are assuming the personality of the leader that you chose. And then we need the rest of you to be parliament members for specific districts, either Palestinians or Israelis. Remember, the district could be also a mixed district. You will have to decide who you want to be, and you have to have the intellectual honesty to be consistent in who you are, either Palestinian or Israeli parliament member. And I may challenge you and ask you, what area do you represent? So this is a map of the area, and I'm asking people to decide and what area they represent. You represent 47,000 people. So let's have Palestinian parliament members please vote so we see how many Palestinian parliament members we have. Just to identify yourself, how many Palestinian parliament members we have. Okay, all of those who chose to be Palestinian parliament members. Okay. 30 more seconds. Palestinian parliament members. Okay, and the polling. We have 12 Palestinian parliament members. And let's have Israeli parliament members vote. Israeli parliament members. Please, okay, end the polling. We have 5 Israeli parliament members. I know we have a lot more participants. You can join later as either Israeli or Palestinian, but be consistent, please. Don't vote as Israeli or Palestinian. And the Prime Minister of Israel, the Palestinian Hamas leader, and the PA leaders, you are not allowed to vote in our legislation. We are a separate government. So the first order of business is the Constitution. that we need to pass and ratify. Libby, would you be so kind as to read the Constitution?
Okay. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
Thank you. So this is a short version of our Constitution. We basically say that we do not intend to supersede or supplant any agreements between the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. They can agree to whatever they want, two-state solution, one-state solution, or any other solution. Constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining those agreements. We also agreed to give a veto power to the Palestinian and the Israeli governments on those issues that violate their sovereignty. Does anyone have any questions regarding this Constitution? Professor Peri, do you have any questions or comments?
Not at all. It looks fine to me.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, hearing no questions, let's have the parliament member vote. Let's start with the Palestinian parliament members. Do you support the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation? Palestinian parliament members only, please vote. So that you know, if you vote against, you are expelled from the parliament, because in every democratic government, all parliament members need to ratify the Constitution and accept it. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling, publish the results. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members. Okay, publish the results. Also 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of the Constitution, to ratify the Constitution. So congratulations. For the first time in history, Israel and Palestine have a common government, have a common parliament, have a common constitution. This is a momentous event in the history of humanity, and the whole world is going to take note of that and encourage us to go on. So let's go to the next issue, and that is, well, let me just respond to those that are skeptics, and probably also Professor Peri. The Israeli government and the Palestinian governments do not have a reason to object. They cannot articulate a reason to object. Professor Peri said that he thinks that we will not get to 5 million votes. With all due respect, the example that you gave is not similar to having Israelis and Palestinians vote for a common government. It's basically went to on the Israeli side only to the Knesset, and you got 1 million people to vote, but there are 9 million Israelis there, and I think that it is possible to have 2 million Israelis vote because Israel is not a monolithic society. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not have the legal authority to object or to oppose. They don't have the moral authority. They haven't given peace to the people of Israel and Palestine in the last 75 years. And if they try to object, or they will lose legitimacy. And they have never attempted to disrupt. In the past, we actually had an election which was not successful, but it was published in the New York Times in real time, this is reality, not simulated. We published the election. The Israeli or the Palestinian governments have not tried to oppose the common government. And like I said, we had the election, it was not successful, and that's because we did not have enough awareness of the election. But if we will have an awareness of the election, I anticipate that what was alluded to in the assumptions could become a reality and even get higher numbers. All right, now we have a parliament and we need to decide who to give a veto power to. Libby, can you read our first legislation granting a veto power? And then we'll ask Professor Peri to opine on this veto.
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian Authority on issues in which it is indispensable, Hamas on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation of granting a veto power? Professor Peri, do you have any questions regarding this legislation?
No, I don't have any question. Like the previous vote that we had, it looks fine, it looks well, it looks reasonable, but I didn't change my mind regarding the plausibility of the entire process in our days. Your elections took place, or at least that was the ad in the New York Times, 10 years ago. All the indications regarding the hopes of the Israelis to reach an agreement show that the hopes have moved dramatically down. And you know that there are several organizations in Israel that do research on these issues, and we know today that the probability is lower than ever. Though I know that if the option will be reasonable and will be supported by political leaders, the majority of the people will move towards that direction. And I have a fantastic story, but it will take too long to tell the story about that, regarding the Prime Minister Rabin, when he thought that
Professor Peri, I think you misunderstand what this government is. It's not about an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. These are illegitimate governments, entities. We are a separate, independent government. I don't think that the political constellation or political polling that is done in Israel or in Palestine have ever reflected what we are doing is an election for a common government. So you are borrowing from a completely different constellation, and you're concluding based on a different constellation of the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, who are failed governments.
Well, many Israelis, I can talk more easily about the Israelis than the Palestinians. Many Israelis don't see the government as a failing government. The fact that, from their point of view, the fact that we still hold the territories, the occupied territories, show that the governments were very good. The fact that there are more settlements prove that they were excellent, and in the last 3 months, even more than in the past. The problem is that establishing a new government, not a government, a new, how would you call it? A new separate entity has to be built on the assumption that there will be an independent Palestinian state. And
Why? Why is that the necessary assumption?
Oh, that's what's written in the Constitution, that there are two separate independent states, Israel and Palestine, and on top of these two, there will be the ICP.
No, that's not what's written in the Constitution. I'm sorry. The Constitution does not presume the existence of these governments. The Constitution says that we will give them a veto power.
No. But before that, we said here the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments. Now,
Correct.
Many Israelis will say today, I cannot see a Palestinian independent government or independent state. It is in the
Correct, but that's not a necessary element for the creation of a common government. These are two different issues. You can have the Israeli and the Palestinian government could be or not be. It's not required. The common government does not stand on the shoulders of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments.
So if a Palestinian government does not exist according to those who don't want it to exist, the entire topic of a veto doesn't exist there. How could the Palestinian government have a veto right if I don't agree that, I'm not talking about myself, of course, if I don't agree that there will be a Palestinian government?
That's why we have a legislation specifically on who we give a veto power. And the legislation specifically says that the veto power is given to these specific governments, but it could change.
It could change, but
Not
as
part
long
of the
as
Constitution.
it could change, but as long as there is a Palestinian government that has a veto power, I cannot, if I represent the majority of the Israelis today, it might change later. I cannot accept it because I don't want to have a Palestinian state or a Palestinian government.
It has nothing to do with the Palestinian state. We have been elected. Okay, we are the government. We have been elected. We have 300 parliament members. Okay, I am the president and vice president. We are looking at reality as it is today. And we are passing legislation as it is today. And we say, based on what we see today, we give a veto power to these entities. However, in the event of changes in government, this legislation may be amended or repealed. It's not a necessary underlying requirement that those governments will exist. They exist now, we recognize them, and we recognize that we cannot function unless we give them a veto power.
Could I make a possible suggestion that I think what Yoram is speaking to is, if I understand you correctly, is that
Why don't you
Israel.
let Yoram express his own views rather than you interpreting what he's saying.
No, I'm willing to hear. I'm willing to hear.
Okay.
So from your perspective, are you saying we're just treating with the current situation? We're treating the Palestinian Authority and Hamas as governments because they retain political power, not because they're legitimate. Are you saying that the Israelis would refuse to vote based on, I mean, you're going back to the voting issue, that this wouldn't come into existence because I think you're putting the cart before the horse, because if people voted and the IPC was created, then we go through the granting, accept the Constitution, the granting of the veto power, and so on. And, you know, whether or not the Israeli public would at large would object to that is really not part of their purview. That's part of the purview of the Confederation at that point.
Of the parliament.
Of the parliament, yes.
I'm not sure. My perception is that we are establishing a new structure which I can support, based on the idea that there are two political entities, the Israeli identity and the Palestinian identity.
No, based on two governments, not identity. There is nothing identity.
Even worse if you say government.
Okay.
Because government means that there is a political institution that this government controls, this government represents, which I call the Palestinian state. And most Israelis
No,
do not
it's not Palestinian state. It's not a Palestinian state.
You have a government without a state?
Yes.
Where do you have in the world a government without a state, beside the
Palestinian and the Israeli?
So they have an authority. What's the difference?
Okay.
They have an authority. They have a designed area that they control. They have the military force or police force. It's a sort of a state, not a full state. But why do we call them the authority? And when we move beyond that, people will say we are moving even further away from what we had. The whole idea of the Israelis who were forced to agree to sort of a Palestinian self-determination was to have a autonomy. So Begin was very unhappy when the autonomy became a Palestinian authority. Now we are talking about the Palestinian government, which is even more institutionalized.
Look at the legislation. We are saying the government of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. We are giving them a veto power in this legislation because it's convenient to us, not because we recognize them, not because they are legitimate, because we are the legitimate government here.
Joseph, thank you very much for reminding me about Hamas, which makes my argument even stronger. While Israelis are divided half and half, more or less, now less than in the past, willing to recognize a Palestinian authority controlled by Ashraf, by the PLO, I believe that 90% of the Israelis do not want to see anything that is related to a political institutionalization of Hamas. Now, I advocate that Israel should negotiate with Hamas, but I guess that I belong to...
But it doesn't matter what the Israeli thinks. We are a separate government.
No, they will not participate in elections. That's what I'm arguing. If the Israelis today will have to participate in elections that recognize some political expression to the Hamas, 90% will say, forget about it. While if
what the percentage of Israelis that you think would vote? That's the bottom line.
If the Hamas is an independent institution like the Palestinian Authority, 5% will vote.
Okay, 5%. 5% of 9 million is 500. That's what you're saying. 500,000 Israelis would. That's your prediction.
Yes.
Okay.
How can I say 5? But what I mean is very, very, very small number.
Okay. What I am saying is that with all due respect, I mean, you're the political advisor to, I don't think that you have enough expertise to determine or to predict how many Palestinians or Israelis will vote for a common government.
Well, here you are breaking an agreement that you specified in the beginning not to talk about personalities, and you doubt my expertise. I definitely am not an expert in the Palestinian people, but I believe that I am an expert of the Israeli population, particularly the Israeli Jews, and I will argue that if you ask Israelis today to recognize any political institution that is legitimate, led by the Hamas, no more than 5% will say, okay, let's do it.
That's not going to be presented to them in that fashion. What's going to be presented to them is that we have a common government, we have an election, you can vote for Israeli or Palestinian parliament member, and you can vote for for a parliament member in your district. Now, this is what you see here is subsequent legislation. Okay, that legislation may fail, but I think we had enough discussion on this legislation. Let's have a vote on this. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation. Okay. Publish the vote. 85% of the Palestinian parliament members voted on this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members, please publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members. So this is the legislation that passed. We are giving a veto power to these entities. And if they change, we will amend our legislation. Let's go to the next.
I wonder why the Palestinian members of parliamentarians who voted no did so. What's the argument to vote against it?
I can answer that question because I voted no.
All right, I'll be happy to hear.
And I'm a Palestinian. For me, and I understand, and I think we discuss this every meeting, but for me, singling out Hamas, which I understand, and Joseph actually answered this question, that if the situation was to change, it could be amended. For me, I would just like it to say the governing authority of the territories, which could mean whether it was ruled by Fatah or whether it's ruled by Hamas or any other party. I just don't like to have a specific party mentioned because we don't want to say Israel, the Likud, or the other party. That's it.
All right, let's go on to the next legislation. Which, and by the way, I discussed the legislations with Yoram Peri, and and this is the first legislation we discussed, and that's high-speed train connecting Israel and Palestine.
Joseph, do you mind if I answer Mr. Perry's question also on the Palestinians?
Oh yeah, I apologize. Yes, Mona.
Not at all. No need for apologies, sir. Thank you for convening us, and thank you to Mr. Perry for his participation today. I agree with Mr. Perry's presumption that most Palestinians would not support any role for Hamas. Maybe not as high as the percentage of Israelis that may not support a role for Hamas in the Confederation.
No, I did. Excuse me. I didn't say that. I don't want to say anything about the Palestinians because I'm not sure. I was talking about the Israeli Jews.
Correct, but you asked that you thought it would be similar for the
Oh,
Palestinians.
yeah,
You wanted the
sure.
Palestinians to verify. So I'm
Sure.
saying I would confirm that a majority would not, but for sure, they would not support a veto for Hamas.
Mm,
So even if they were able to acknowledge that because of de facto reasons, Hamas needs to be part of the equation because they have effective control on the ground. To give them the right of a sovereign entity, like the PA or the Israeli government, would be a step too far for most Palestinians. But I mean, that's just one person's point of view.
mhm. Thank you.
All right, let me just respond. This is a legislation presented to the parliament, not to the Palestinian or the Israeli public. And the reason we need this legislation is to have the common government be able to function. And in order to implement legislation, and we identified those entities that can prevent us from functioning, and those are the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and therefore we give them a veto power. Without giving Hamas a veto power, we lose 2 million people in Gaza, and we're not able to function. And we're making the exact same mistake that Israel is making, which is making Hamas the enemy. We don't want to make Hamas the enemy. We want to work with Hamas. All right, let's go to the high-speed train. Libby, could you please read it?
Installation of a high-speed train connecting the entire state of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza to transport people and goods to the international airport and the joint economic zone. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Professor?
I have a comment, if I may.
Sure.
This is one example of about 4 or 5 different articles which I would amend and make it more general. As we are talking about a very general document, I don't see why there should be 2 different elements. One is about the Mediterranean, the high-speed train, and the other one is the West Bank Mediterranean transportation system. Both are fine. I'm talking about only, it's a matter of editing some elements which are separated into a more general concept, because we are dealing with a very important and basic paper. So why not saying in addition to high-speed train connecting, talk about other things in the sky or in the electronic system. The need for connecting well the members of this new institution, new structure should be in general terms.
Well,
But it's mainly a minor thing, but because the
Okay.
idea is fine, the idea is wonderful.
all right. Any questions regarding this legislation?
Pete has a question.
Hi. Yes, this legislation. So if you're pitching this legislation, does this say that anyone can get on this train and anyone can get off this train whenever they want? Because at the moment, the Palestinians don't have any freedom to travel around their own country. So we need to know.
Okay, that it doesn't really say anything about who gets on this. Okay,
No.
the subsequent legislation. We deal with one thing at a time.
Yeah, well, who's going to use the train? Is the train for everyone or is the train just for Israelis? We need to know.
That's a very valid question. And
Well-
and then we have more legislation. We have a legislation about a joint economic zone that would clarify this, but it's really a technical question. Right now is you're not going to build a train with people not getting on it. Then it's another question for legislation.
Are,
I mean,
are
it's a
you,
fundamental question.
are you aware of the rail system that's in Jerusalem that goes right through Palestinian areas and to settlements into Besgat Zayev and Neve Yaakov?
No,
This-
No, can anyone get on and off that whenever they feel like?
Well,
without
they-
being
they-
told?
they can if
There is no train to these Israeli settlements. What you should do instead is write a general-
Besgat Zayev is an Israeli settlement in East Jerusalem. Neve Yaakov is an Israeli settlement in East Jerusalem. There is
No, but there is no high-speed train.
it's
There
not
is
a, no, but I'm comparing this to the rail system, the street rail, the street cart that goes through Shafat and cuts
I
through
see.
Shafat right to Besgat Zayev. So the question from a proposal like this, is this high-speed train going to encourage more Israelis to move to more affordable homes in the West Bank where they can commute by train to work to Tel Aviv? This is a dangerous proposal for Palestinians in the West Bank.
Why not having a general article saying that there will be many transportation systems that will connect Israel and Palestine, and all Israelis and Palestinians will be able to use them.
That's a valid point, but let's take a vote on this.
I just think it's too premature to talk about this before we figure out what we're going to do with these settlements and Palestinian statehood. This is in fact, to me, fortifying the settlement enterprise. If you do this before solving those other problems, you're creating a worse situation. You're going to make Israel more harder and penetrated inside the West Bank and harder for any solution to come in the future.
Well, that's actually not true because the Israelis are able to travel regardless of whether there is a train.
But because of the roads that were built, the freeway networks that were built,
Yes,
this is going to make
Israelis
it even more.
are able. In fact, the only people that are excluded are the Palestinians.
Yeah, but I don't know. This to me seems like
So
throwing gasoline
you're
on the fire.
connecting the settlement project just to bring up the settlement project, but it has nothing to do with the high-speed train. The first person asked who's going to get on it, and that's a legitimate question. But that does not, you're saying this would increase the settlement project?
Just like the freeway system has, just like the buildings have, just like more affordable housing has. It will
Yeah,
encourage
but it also will, it will increase the Palestinians' mobility into the whole area. All right, let's take a vote on this high-speed train.
This is for the Palestinians, the first one, right?
Palestinians. I know you're going to vote no. Okay.
I'm not against it. I just want to make sure that it's not going to be the detriment of us. That's it. Otherwise, I'm for it.
Well, you just voted no, right?
Well, now, no. In the future, when everything is negotiated, yes, absolutely. Let's have it.
Okay. Let's end the polling, publish the results. 80% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Okay, publish the results. Also, 80% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation.
Here I have the same question to the Israelis. Why are you against it?
Look, this is a simulation. We're not going to have a discussion about everything. You know, they are the minority. Why pay attention to the minority when?
Oh, we are liberals. We pay attention to minorities.
Important, yes.
Not in this simulation. Just take over, okay? And we don't want it. We want to show how a common government will work. We don't have the luxury of days and days of a discussion. So let's go to the next legislation. Is a joint economic zone. Could you please, Libby?
Excuse me, you forgot to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The Prime Minister of Israel, are you vetoing this legislation?
I veto it for the moment because It is a very vague proposal. It talks about an international airport and joint economic zone, so I think it's jumping the gun. I would like to also see, have the IPC present to me a clear outline of what the economic benefit of this project would be. You talk about an international airport. Yeah, you have to explain much more of what you want and what you're proposing, because a high-speed train just like that doesn't sound a very concrete idea. So until I see more results, I will keep a veto.
Okay,
And
let's
I'm
go to
totally
the,
happy to discuss.
okay, let's go to the PA. Palestinian Authority, are you going to veto this legislation? President of the Palestinian Authority?
As presented on the face of it, I would support it because I would like more clarification, but it appears to be something that's going to facilitate travel between the West Bank and Gaza, which is something that I wholeheartedly would support.
Okay, let's go to the Hamas leader.
Same here. Any kind of initiative to connect between the West Bank and Gaza is very much welcome.
All right, so you do not vote. Okay, all right. So we are just demonstrating how it could work. Let's go to the Joint Economic Zone. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Joint Economic Zone, or JEZ, between Israel and Gaza. Exclusive IPC management and control and cooperation with the existing governments. A common economy. Education, industry, banking, agriculture, sewer treatment, desalination plants, solar farms, wind power, and green energy. International airport and seaport, equally accessible to Israeli and Palestinians. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Any questions regarding this legislation?
I have a question. Why the joint economic zone between Israel and Gaza is mentioned and not economic zone between Israel and Palestine? Why only on the
We have another legislation for a joint economic zone between in Kalandia, but this is specifically because Gaza has specific needs. It has the ocean. It's under. It's completely surrounded by Israel, and it has a completely different needs than the West Bank.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, hearing no questions, let's have a vote on this joint economic zone. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Okay, publish the votes. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's vote. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Please publish the vote. 80% of the Israeli parliament members so voted yes. Congratulations, this legislation passed. Let's go to the Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation?
I don't see any mention here of security arrangements to make sure that the terrorists will not take advantage of any of this. I would like to have a very clear understanding of the financial flows that will go in and out of such a joint economic zone. And I would like to have to make sure that Israel has full veto power on all decisions taken by the board of the joint economic zone at all times. Given all these premises, I would not necessarily veto it if all these premises can be answered in a satisfactory manner.
Palestinian Authority leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
And Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation? Zohar? Okay.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, no, not vetoing.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next legislation is about the refugees, compensation to Palestinian refugees. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Original refugees are offered two options. Option one, return and $250,000 compensation. Option two, accepting compensation of $500,000 and waiving a right of return. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Professor Perry, do you have any questions or comments regarding this legislation?
I do have a comment, and as you already saw me or heard what I spoke about in general and in particular, I belong to the small minority of left-wing or progressive or liberal Israelis. But that element I cannot accept at all because the entire concept of return, of the right of return, or practicing, implementing the right of return means to all Israelis, a way to destroy the Jewish nature of the Israeli state.
Professor Perry, when you say you cannot accept this, are you speaking as a parliament member or are you speaking as Israeli?
No, I'm talking only about myself, and I'm talking about the perception that I have about the Israelis. No Israeli from left, center, right, religious, secular, Ashkenazi or Mizrahi, educated or uneducated, will accept the right of return of the Palestinians into the area that is controlled by Israel. The most progressive position that was presented by an Israeli leader was Ehud Olmert in his negotiations with the Palestinian president, and they spoke about accepting 60, 70, 80,000 Palestinians back to Israel. No one will accept more than that. So if you put that into the Israeli public, they will say, thank you very much for your entire program.
Yeah, but this is not being put to the Israeli public. We are a common government. It is put to the parliament. We are a parliament.
Again, if the Israelis know that it is put to the parliament, they will not take part in the elections. You will find zero Israelis. You will find zero Israelis voting for the election, participating in the elections.
All right. So let's. Any other questions? Not comment. Any other questions regarding this legislation?
Does this legislation preclude that in the future a Palestinian state would be able to set their own immigration policy so that they
Nasir, read the legislation.
Yeah,
what?
But you're saying this is the legislation as of now. But
correct.
Okay, so because you're saying that accepting
read the legislation, why bring other issues that are
I'm just asking for clarification because we're asking people to waive their right of return, and
we're not asking them, we're giving them an option. Okay. Any questions? Okay, hearing
yes, I've got a question.
There's two questions. Sorry.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please, John.
Yeah, I want to ask Professor Perry. Clearly, this issue here is perhaps the most important one for both Israelis and Palestinians. It's crucial and it's elementary. And of course, this is where the function of applying the the veto would certainly come in from the Israelis to veto any return of Palestinian refugees. I want to ask Professor Perry that at the beginning you stated that in the IPC configuration, you would include the state of Jordan. Would you look upon the contribution of Jordan as an overflow tank for Palestinian refugees?
I believe, first of all, I believe that the Palestinians, the Palestinian refugees have the right of return because they were kicked out or moved by, because of, doesn't matter what the reasons are, whether they did it on their own volition or they were asked by their leaders or they were kicked out. But there is a Palestinian refugee problem that has to be resolved. It cannot be resolved within the territory of Israel, small Israel, but it should be resolved. So whether it is being resolved in Palestine or in Jordan, it doesn't matter. If there is I'm not sure whether the Jordanians will be very happy to have another 1 million Palestinians there, because the tension between Palestinians and Jordanians are not minimal. So, and I believe that the majority of the Palestinians, but this is just a belief, based on discussions that I have with many Palestinian leaders, I believe that most of the Palestinians will be happy to receive very nice compensation and find a way to settle in other places. But to ask them to tell them that they can move back to Israel, then it won't work.
So what's the function of the participation of Jordan in IPC?
Sorry, say again.
What function would Jordan play in the IPC?
Oh, maybe, well, a huge function. There will be it will be a confederation. There will be a joint economic program. There will be a joint defense program. There will be very many things. Now, regarding the Palestinians, maybe Jordan will accept to get 200,000 or 300,000, 400,000 Palestinians. I don't think they will take more than that. But other Palestinians, refugees, can settle down in other places, in wherever they want, and within any state that it will be willing to give them. Most people don't know today, but in 1961, in 1961, there was an American proposal to Israel. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Golda Meir then didn't accept it. The American government was willing to solve the problem of the refugees from the Gaza area. There were about a few 100,000, and ask Israel to accept only 80,000. And we're willing to support the other refugees to settle all over the world, including in the United States. And then there were only, as I said, a few 100,000, not 2 million. So and I believe that the leaders of the Palestinian moderates, PLO, understand that they cannot discuss with Israel the implementation of the right of return. If you want another sentence, I will tell you, I believe that the solution, a way to reach an agreement between the Israeli leaders and the Palestinian leaders is not so difficult if there is a political will, because you have here two major issues: Jerusalem and the Palestinians, refugees. Israel will not accept any solution to the Palestinians within Israel, and the Palestinians will not accept any solution without having East Jerusalem as the capital. So because these two elements are there, it can be reached. But that's when the leadership is going to change.
Does anyone else have any questions before we take a vote?
Yes, Joseph, I have a question. If I
Yeah,
can.
Zohar, yes, go ahead.
Just to, actually, it's for Professor Peri, if I may. First of all, thank you, Professor, for attending. This is an honor being with you on the call. We're very happy to have the opportunity to listen and to hear from your expertise and experience in negotiating peace talks with the Palestinians before. With this in mind, you mentioned about the necessity to maintain a Jewish majority in Israel and how no Israeli today would accept foregoing Jewish majority. One, as an Israeli, I would like to say that I know many Israelis that today they do not care whether there's a Jewish majority in Israel or not. So I'm not too sure about how accurate this statement is. Second, I was wondering, with your familiarity in history, do you find any dissimilarities between the reluctance of Jewish people in Israel to insist on having a Jewish majority? Do you find any difference between that of the white Americans in the South not wanting to give full rights to African Americans under Jim Crow, or that of the Afrikaners in South Africa that wanted to maintain a white-only state or rule over parts of South Africa?
Not
That's
at
it,
all.
thank you.
Going beyond, I want to finish this simulation, and then we'll go into the general question. This seems to be under the general question. Let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please, on this compensation to Palestinian refugees. Palestinian parliament. Do you support compensation to Palestinian refugees with a combination of a right of return? Okay, let's end the voting. Share the results. 88% of the Palestinian parliament members. Let's have the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament, do you support compensation to Palestinian refugees? Okay, please publish the vote. Share the results. 75% of the Israeli parliament members were against this legislation. Okay, so the reason it's important to show this legislation is really to refute what Professor Peri is saying, that Israelis will not vote because this legislation could be introduced. But what he forgot, Professor Peri, with all due respect, is that the Israelis are given an opportunity to vote, and in addition, they have a veto power. So just because possible legislation could be introduced is not a reason for them to not to vote, not to participate in the common government, because this legislation actually shows that there is enough safeguards for the Israelis and the Palestinians that would not preclude, that does not give them that preclude any reason for them not to participate in the common government.
But even according to your concept, the results of the Israeli members of parliament here on that question was a huge compared to all the other questions that we discussed. It was 80% or so, while the other questions, there was only 5–10%. It shows you that even here in this particular meeting with people who are, most of them, I guess, are progressive, you have such a huge amount of majority against it, which only
against this legislation. I agree.
All right.
It's not against the concept of a common government.
No.
You are saying that this legislation, if the Israeli public were aware that the common government could bring this kind of legislation, they would never vote. So let's say we have a campaign for a common government, you would say, hey, Israeli people, this legislation could come up. Do you really want to have a common government? And I would say, in response to what you're saying, yes, it could come up, but it could also, the Israeli parliament members will have an opportunity to decline.
I wish you were right, and
The game will continue, and the Israeli government will have a veto power.
I understand. I wish you were right, and I wish that most people would be intelligent to understand the subtleties of these questions. Most are not. They will see such an option that there is a right of return, and they will not go into details.
Okay.
Joseph, Shlomo and I have raised our hand with questions on this legislation.
Okay, go ahead.
I think Shlomo is first.
Very quickly, if I'm an Arab and I'd like to settle in Israel, the Jewish state, am I allowed to, or because I'm Arab, I'm not? I mean, that's a question before even the right of return.
Are you asking this question in general or regarding this legislation?
It has to do with this legislation because I
Are
can be
Are you
Palestinian.
are you a refugee, original refugee?
Does it matter? And if I'm not a
Well,
refugee,
yes, it does. This legislation is for original refugees.
I have $1 million. I am an Arab with $1 million or $10 million. I want to come to Israel and invest and become
This
an
legislation does not apply to you.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
All right, let's go to the next person.
I think
Uh,
Mona wanted to
Mona.
say something.
Thank
Mona,
you.
what's your question?
I have a quick question to you, Joseph, regarding would you be willing to consider 1 or 2 slight amendments to your legislation to make it more likely to succeed? And that would entail,
Absolutely, I have an amendment.
and that would entail putting it in the context of the international law that provides an inalienable right of return, and also taking into consideration more realistic options that would make it more tenable. Most Palestinians would probably waive their right of return, even without money, if that right was merely recognized as a right that is for them to waive and not for anybody else to waive on their
Mona,
behalf.
please
Uh,
write me a legislation. I'm not gonna.
Right. Okay, I'm just asking you the question.
Yes,
That there is a law that
here,
you
look,
can
I
have-
anticipated the legislation to fail. I knew it's gonna fail.
I understand.
We
but
are
for the-
demonstrating how a common government will work. Okay, so here I have an amended compensation. Okay. Original, okay, Libby, could you please read the amended legislation?
Right, but
Original
I
19.
also have a question for Mr. Perry.
Mona, the answer is very simple.
I didn't ask my question yet.
I thought I understand.
That
your
was a question to Joseph, and he has an answer to the amendment solution. But for you, sir, I don't understand how you can foreclose the possibility of a right of return, even if it includes the exercise of the right to waive citizenship in Israel, and thereby not affect the demographic Jewish character of the state, but would nonetheless allow people to exercise their right of return potentially as residents and not as citizens. Second, to the extent that Jewish people around the world continue to enjoy an absolute right of return and exercise that right on a daily
Mona,
basis.
I'm gonna veto your question because
Okay.
it's beyond the scope of this legislation. You can ask that in the comment section. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Okay, with the Q&A.
happy to do so.
Okay.
If you ask it, I will answer you, Mona.
All right. Please, Libby, could you read the
All
amended?
right, so this is the amended compensation to Palestinian refugees. Original 1948 and 1967 refugees to be compensated $100,000 each. First generation descendants of original refugees to be compensated $25,000 each. This legislation is not submitted to the Israeli or Palestinian governments for veto since it does not violate their sovereignty.
Okay, so we are the legitimate government of Israel, Palestine. We encountered a refusal by the parliament to pass the previous legislation, and possibly we're going to get a veto. So now we are passing this new legislation that does not require the Israeli or the Palestinian government to doesn't require their permission. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation?
I have a question, Joseph. With regard to this and the original motion on compensation for refugees, is this for individuals or is it for families?
Individuals.
So if a family has 10, it would be 10 times that compensation.
And individuals, yes.
Okay.
Okay, hearing no further questions on this, let's have the Palestinian parliament members, please.
I'm sorry.
Did you raise your hand?
Let me raise my hand. Sorry.
Palestinian parliament members, please
I
vote.
had a question.
Yes.
So if I accept this money, if I'm a Palestinian refugee and I accept this money, am I giving up my right to return?
No.
So this is just compensation in the interim.
This is a compensation in order to elevate our status as a legitimate government for the people of Israel and Palestine, and to show our recognition of what happened to them, and to show that they need to be compensated.
So I'm not giving up my right to return. All I'm doing is getting some money.
Exactly. You're going to get some money, and just like the Jews got money from Germany. Okay. So we are the common government. We want to recognize what was done, and we want to put our money where our mouth is, and we want to give money to the original Palestinian refugees in order to recognize them and to buy our peace.
Had I been a Palestinian, I wouldn't have accepted it, because it doesn't say.
That's up to you. You don't have to accept it. You don't have. Okay, share the results. 86% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay, and the polling. 75% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. I want to thank you for.
As a Israeli Prime Minister, I have a proposal.
You're not giving a veto power.
I know, but I'm making a proposal on this legislation. I know that the IPC is cash strapped and that needs money. So I would offer, Israel is willing to forward this money, to make this money available for Palestinians who want to take advantage of it, as long as they sign a statement where they renounce forever their right of return. Then we will give them that money, and the IPC will save money.
Are you as the Prime Minister of Israel, you're willing to put up the money?
Yes, as long as the Palestinians sign a statement, a declaration that they will never return to Israel. So if any Palestinian who renounces that will receive this compensation money.
All right, that's okay. Let's go to the post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common government for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza that will exist with the Israeli and Palestinian government? Please vote on the post-simulation survey. Do you support a common government? Okay. And the polling. So the post-simulation survey, I'm not sure if it's the same number, but it's 100% of the participants support the common government. So, and we started with 12% opposition. So it looks like we have changed some hearts. Let's go, before we go to a closing remark, let's go now to open Q&A with Professor Peri, and I'm going to stop sharing. All right. Please raise your hands if you have any questions, and now we ask Professor Peri. Let's start with Shlomo Orr and then Sean.
Well, I have many questions for Professor Peri.
Okay.
I will.
You will reserve your. Okay, Sean.
Okay.
Mr. Yoram Peri, you mentioned that the Israelis don't like the refugees. They don't like the right of return. And that kind of reminds me of this one guy back in the 80s. And you know what? I don't know. Maybe they're inspired by that guy. You remember that guy, Mir Kahan?
Do I remember what?
Mayor Kahana.
Of course. Unfortunately, I have to remember him because his disciples are now members of the Israeli cabinet.
Wow.
What
I
is your
think
question?
Sean got lost. Something happened to him. He wanted to ask a question and he disappeared.
Sean, what is your question? Okay, let me,
You lost connection.
okay, I'm gonna admit him again.
Never mind.
Oh, here he is. No.
Maybe we should go on to Zohar and come back to
Okay,
Sean.
let's go to.
Now, I already asked my questions before, but we jumped because it was in the middle of the simulation. But if we remember the question from then that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, is this, I have Giacomo next and then Zohar and then Mona. And then, yeah.
Yes, my comment was as Israeli Prime Minister made that proposal to fund the compensation, I did it on purpose to illustrate the possibilities of some parties exerting influence on the IPC through money, the power of money. Israel being the richest country, although they have the same right of veto as the Palestinians, and there's a 55% and so on, Israel has money, and they can sort of use their economic pressure to take advantage of decisions of the IPC. Just as in terms of mechanism, and it came to my mind just now that maybe the IPC should think about this risk of one of the three authorities having undue power because of its obviously economic might.
So you did that to embarrass the IPC?
Well, to illustrate the point at this this is a simulation, so we're trying to highlight the issues, how the thing would work in practice, and this is a practical issue that we might want to consider to address. It's not no opposition or no criticism. It's just something that came to my mind, you know.
No, I think you illustrated that very well, but don't forget, we have 300 parliament members. They're going to have their own decision, and that we will have months and weeks to discuss those issues, and you will be questioned on what's your motivation, Mr. Prime Minister. All right, let's go to Zohar. And Sean.
Thank you, Joseph. Oh, is Sean back? No?
Yes.
Sean, ask your question.
Oh, so Sean,
ask?
please go ahead. You were in the middle of it, though. Jump in
Okay,
later.
sorry, I got disconnected. Sorry, Mr. Yoram Peri. What I was mentioning about that the Israeli don't like the Red Return of the Refugee, and it reminds me of this guy from the '80s. That guy Mir Kahan. This guy was a right-wing extremist, and he was actually advocating for the Arabs to leave Israel, and that he was actually paying them to leave Israel. And then everybody was inspired by him, by Israel, that they actually liked that guy, and then they were actually inspired by his movement. So do you think this Israeli society support Mir Kahan and his movement into getting rid of all the Arabs from the land? Because he was a right-wing extremist. Do you remember that guy?
Of course.
Yeah.
Should I answer now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Meir Kahane was the most extreme Israeli political leader, and he was elected to the Knesset, but could not run for the second time. He was outcasted by every Israeli. There was a very small group of people who are his disciples, and unfortunately, some of them are now members of the cabinet. But Meir Kahane does not reflect the vast majority of the Israeli opinion. If you mention the name Meir Kahane today to the 500,000 demonstrators who participate in the demonstrations every Saturday night, they will hang you. He's perceived as a racist, as a fascist. And when you say that all Israelis support him, the opposite.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm trying to understand.
The opposite.
Oh, okay. Right.
Okay, let's go to Zohar now, and then Mona. Zohar, please ask your question.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, I presented the question earlier about something that I've noticed going into debates with various people in Israel, I see this difference between those who say Israel will never agree to giving up on Jewish majority and Zionism is important and such. But of course, there is a small yet growing post-Zionist, anti-Zionist, all different kind of forms of non-Zionist versions that are more than happy to give up on having a Jewish majority. Now, I'm asking Professor Peri whether he sees much of a difference between the reluctance of white Afrikaners in South Africa 30 years before the fall of apartheid there, or a southern white in the US that were very much against giving up on Jim Crow, and how can you settle the idea that Jews in Israel will never agree? Thank you.
I prefer to answer your question after Mona because she started to ask a question that I think is very similar. So please, Mona, let's hear you first.
Thank you both. So I mean, I haven't really thought this through, but I just found, given how much I agree with much of what you said earlier, I found your categorical rejection of this. And I understand that you're contextualizing it and that you think most Israelis would reject this. To be rather surprising. One, because it is a right that is enshrined in international law, and that there are obligations on states to accept that right and to ensure respect for that right. But also because the right of return is categorically reserved for Jews around the world who've never set foot in Israel and who maybe have no desire whatsoever to exercise that right. Similarly, there are Palestinians, many of whom have themselves either been born or have been born to people who were born there, first generation, second generation, not because of a 2000 right, but because of a current right, because of a current right of birth, would wish to exercise the right of return. Now, the right of return doesn't necessarily mean the right of citizenship. And I can understand that the demographic concern that you've articulated, but there are formulas that have been considered, not only by the Omer administration, but by others, whereby Palestinians would be allowed to return either as residents or with residence permits, where they would have to recognize Israeli sovereignty over those portions of the land, while being Palestinian citizens, for instance, or keeping other citizenships and having a residency permit. The same way many of us live in many countries, even though we're citizens of different countries. So there are formulas that would allow a right of return without altering the demographic nature and character of the Jewish state. More importantly, there are ways to allow for Palestinian return while increasing Jewish return and diminishing Jewish departure. Those are as much a threat to the demographic character of the state as any Palestinian return. Especially with the increasingly extremist nature of the governments of Israel, many Israelis are choosing to leave Israel. And many of those who may have considered coming to no longer wish to do so. So there's other ways of improving both the lot of Israeli lives as well as Palestinian lives without foreclosing inalienable rights that are enjoyed under international law.
I understand. Well, first of all, a short answer, I wouldn't like to see Palestinians or anybody else in the state of Israel as a second-class citizen without citizenship. We spoke, and that was the beginning of the new constitution that we discussed earlier, that there should be equality. And I don't like the idea that there are two classes of citizens: those who are citizens and those who are just who are not citizens. But let me explain the point in a wider sense. The tragic story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that there are two national movements, both are just, and both have legitimate rights. It's the only case in history that I remember, and this answers a Zohar question about comparing the Israeli case to the blacks or the whites in South Africa or in the United States. There are two national rights, both have the legitimate rights for self-determination. and they claimed on one territory. So there were three options: either to divide, or to live together in peace, or to kill each other. Unfortunately, they didn't want to kill each other. No, unfortunately, they chose to kill each other instead of living in peace. But the only reasonable answer is to divide the area, to divide Israel to the Jews. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be Palestinians living in Israel as full citizens, and to Palestine. And it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be Jews in Palestine as full citizens. So these two states can solve the problem of the Jewish national movement and the Palestinian national movement. When we reach the question of the refugees, that solves the problem. Jews outside Israel, because they belong to the Jewish people, should continue to have right to move to Israel, and Palestinians all over the world should have the right to move to Palestine and to live in peace in Palestine, and the two states should live in peace with each other. If it is within the structure of a confederation, fine. If not, to live in peace in two separate states. So you cannot compare the Israeli case to the cases of whites in other places, and you cannot ask the Israeli Jews not to disconnect themselves from Jews outside Israel. Now, there is a growing movement in Israel in the last several years, and particularly in the last several months, of people who say Israeli Jews should be Israelis and not Jews. Let this disconnect relations between Israelis and Jews. Jews are Jews, Israelis are Israelis, whoever they are. But this movement, which is called post-Zionism, does not get the support of more than 5, maximum 10% of the Israelis, and it will not grow in the near future. It will not. In ideal world, it could be done, but it will not be done. Regarding the Palestinians, as I said earlier, knowing the position of their leadership from my very many conversations, they understand that Israel will not accept Palestinian refugees into Israel, but Israel will accept Palestinian refugees moving back to the new state of the Palestinians in the West Bank, which is Palestine. So the problem is not so sophisticated, nor complicated, if there will be a political will. Unfortunately, we don't have a political will, neither by the Palestinian leaders, and even more so by the Israeli leaders of today. I hope very much that it will change in the future, probably not in the next 3, 4, 5 months, years, but maybe within a decade it will change, and people will realize that there can't be a compromise between the two nations. After all, the French and Germans fought for tens of years, if not more, and then they realized that they can make peace. Maybe the Jews and the Palestinians will be able to do that as well.
All right, let's go to Jay, Charles, Shlomo, and Nasir.
Everyone knows that last week Netanyahu appointed Smotrich to take over the announcement for the 100,000 new homes near Eli after all of the violence in Jenin and Nablus. Nothing in what I've heard today discusses settlements and the future of either the existing settlements or the creation of new settlements. I'd like to know if Mr. Peri has a view on that in context of the IPC, number one. And number two, in response to his last response, he said either live together, kill each other, or separate. And as if each one was totally different than the others. One of the agreements to the peace agreements early on, I guess as a function after Oslo, was that a large portion of northern West Bank currently either owned or controlled by Israel would be given to Palestine as a territorial trade of a nature to balance off settlement activity. But that third area up in the up the north, for lack of a better location, could be where both sides, those who want to live together, can have joint operations. What do you think?
The issue of the settlement is a very sad issue. And that is that I supported the concept that was developed immediately after 1967, that there should be some amendments along the 67 border. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and the settlements were established on the West Bank and Gaza, which I think is a terrible mistake of the Israeli authorities that let it happen. In the serious negotiations that took place between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the late 90s, a solution was created, namely that there will be a swap of land between Israel and Palestine, which will solve the issue of the settlements as well, because Israel could give back about 5 to 6% of the territories in return for territories for the Palestinians, which will include 60 or 70% of the settlers. That could have been done then. Today, it's more difficult, but I still believe that the Shaul Arieli, who is the best expert on that issue, is right saying that it can be solved. Technically, maybe there will be some Israeli settlements as integral part of Palestine. I'm not sure how many Jews will be happy to live there, but technically it can happen, but it still can be solved. If there is a confederation, it will be easier because there will be Jewish settlements in Palestine, but Palestine and Israel will live together in peace under the umbrella of the confederation. So it still can be done, but if the situation will not change in the near future and more settlements will be created, that it will make the option of peace much more difficult. And this is exactly the purpose of the present government, which has a minority of the most extreme Israeli Jews. And unfortunately, Netanyahu does not have a majority without them. And because of his personal problems, he's a captive of these people who are trying to make it impossible to solve the problem in the future. And therefore, I go every Saturday night to the demonstration against this government.
All right, let's go to Charles, then Shlomo, and then Nasir. Charles.
Excuse me. Thank you for your participation. I want to ask your opinion on a couple of things. One is, as Joseph introduced in the beginning, we are anticipating putting up a billboard in Jerusalem stating that a Jewish state is bad for the Jews. I'd like your opinion on that. And what is likely to come up in terms of that is the sense of how much national identities are tied to religion. And whether you spoke to this a little bit, that you say it's a very, very limited support for post-Zionism, but I'm wondering about that. And the surrounding states of Jordan and Syria being constitutionally and Iran, Muslim states, and Israel using this as their justification for claiming that they are a liberal democracy when in fact they are not.
Charles, the question to the answer to your first question is related to what I said earlier, namely that the Jews have the right for self-determination. Namely, the Jews have the right to have their own state in the same way that any other nation, for me, even the Kurds have the right for self-determination.
Yeah, but the difference is, for instance, the French is a Catholic nation, but they do not exclude the
Yeah, yeah.
rights of other minorities. You know, America more or less is a Protestant nation.
I understand.
Germany,
understand.
etc.
I was planning to reach that point.
Okay.
So the problem of the Jewish problem, or one sentence before that, to say that a Jewish state is the Jews. What was the expression that you want to put in Jerusalem? That a Jewish state is bad for the Jews.
Yeah.
Jews is the only nation in the world that 6 million people were slaughtered because they were Jews. So you cannot say that a Jewish state. The Jewish state was a solution to the Jewish problem that suffered for 2,000 years. So
yes,
you
but
cannot
not
say
at
that
the
the Jewish state.
expense of another people.
What I say is that the Jewish state was established to solve the difficulties, the problems, the persecution of the Jewish people. Now, what's the problem with the Jewish state or with the Jews in general? It's the only nation where you cannot dissociate nationality from religion. You can be a Catholic French or Protestant French. You can be a Catholic Italy or a Catholic French. You cannot be a Jew who does not belong to the Jewish nation and to the Jewish religion. That's unfortunately is the problem of the Jewish people. You cannot separate the two.
Given the
You cannot separate the two. And therefore, when you say a Jewish state, I want to say Israel. I don't like the word Jewish state. State cannot be Jewish. Israel should be the state of the Jews and all its citizens. The Jews have the right to have a state, but non-Jews in Israel should be equal to the Jews. Namely, the Jews outside Israel should have the right to move into Israel.
Jews may well have the right to establish an international state for themselves, but not at the expense of another people.
Therefore, I'm for a division between the Jewish state and the Palestinian state. So the Jews have the right to move back to Israel. The Palestinians outside Palestine should have the right to move back to Palestine. And this is probably an answer to Mona. You have to distinguish between the right and the implementation of the right. I'm for fully acknowledging the right of the Palestinians, including the Palestinians, refugees, to move to their territory. But I'm not for implementation of the right of the Palestinians to move back to their homes in Jaffa or in Haifa. Because if that is being done, it will destroy Israel as a state of the Jews. So I have to find a solution to the Palestinians by recognizing their right and find a practical solution for the problem. And if there will be a Palestinian state, I'm sure that most of them will be happy to do that.
I see this as a symptom, if you will, of the inability of international law at this point to recognize individual human rights as prioritized above national rights. That is a situation that is particular in Israel, but it is shared throughout the world. And that, to me, is the basis of what's wrong here. There has to be a priority of human rights over national rights. And no nation state, to my reckoning, is willing to acknowledge that.
I wish you were right, but after the Russian attack on Ukraine, we are talking we are using in terminology that was correct in the last decade of the previous century. Unfortunately, we moved back. When I studied sociology and political science in the 60s, my professor, S.N. Eisenstadt, told us about the future, and he mentioned professors in other universities all over the world who were talking about the new generation, the new world where nationalities will disappear. and there will be United States of America and United States of Europe. Shields spoke about that, United States of Europe, and maybe in the not long future, even United States of Africa. Unfortunately, we moved backwards to the strengthening of nationalism, national movements, national institutions, national concepts. So you are right. I would love to see a different world, but this is not the world we live in. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that it will not change in the very near future.
All right, let's go to Shlomo, and then Nasir, and then Zohar, and then Mona.
Yeah.
Is
I
it
will
okay?
start with Mona.
My question actually relates to what he just said. I mean, I'm not trying to step ahead, but I don't want to like go
You
back.
are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You
Go
are.
ahead.
Let's go to Shlomo.
It's okay. So, Nasir, you can talk, and I'll talk after you.
Yeah, I mean, I love Shlomo. I respect him so much. I don't want to overstep, but
Okay.
thank you. Okay, thank you. So my question is for Dr. For Dr. Yoram Peri. I agree with a lot of what you're presenting, and I think you have you're presenting the mindset that was developed for the Oslo Accords in regards to the solution.
Correct.
And I think it's definitely a pragmatic and workable solution, although many people agree. They say, they want one state, whatever this. But you can agree with this position now, and I do agree with you now, that, the two states with the right of return for both people on their separate states. But let me ask you this. Considering what's happening today in the West Bank, do you think that this is implementable now, that the settlers, the 700,000 of them who are in the West Bank right now, wouldn't basically bring the country to civil war, and the religious right that's in power now would be so dead against something like this that literally, I think it would basically plunge us into like a really bad social situation? Like, are we beyond the point of no return?
It's a very difficult question, but I can look backward 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when some experts, like, I forgot his name, who was the deputy mayor in Jerusalem, Ben Benisti, who said that we reached the point of no return. And he was wrong. And then people say that 10 or 15 years ago, and they were wrong. Today, I'm not sure. If things will not change, in 10 years, I'm sure that we'll reach the stage of no return. Today, as I said earlier, I believe in the analysis of Shaul Arieli. Look at his site on the internet. He published already also not only a catalog but a maps of the area which you can download, where he shows that today we can still give back 90% of the territories to the Palestinian and Palestinian state and solve the issue of the settlers. But as I said earlier, if we don't do it in the near future, it will be much more difficult in the future. Let me add something which I didn't spoke about. I didn't speak about earlier, and it's very important for me to say. There is a article in the Constitution that speaks, page 37. That speaks about the referral to the international law of Bibi Netanyahu and Gallant, the Minister of Defense, for crimes.
That's not part of the Constitution. That's legislation.
But it's part of the document that you published.
No. This is suggested legislation to show how a legislation could be introduced, and whether or not it is acceptable or not is a different question. But
okay.
So I wish that to be as the agenda, or it's not part of the Constitution.
All right. So as I want to help you, I wish you took it out because it is so imbalanced. Crimes were done by Palestinians and by Israelis. If you mention only the Israelis that should be referred to the international law, you change dramatically the balance between the two sides of the scale. Take it out, please.
let's go to,
I put the website for him. I believe that's his website that you mentioned. I put it in the chat if anybody wants to see
let's go to Shlomo.
Yeah, so much discussion here. So first of all, I also was for two-state solution. It was the obvious solution here for many years, but there isn't any, and there won't be any. We have annexation of the whole West Bank and Gaza, even though we say no, but we are putting them in a prison. It's still our prison. We created that prison. And we now create many little prisons there in the West Bank. We have one state. We have expulsion of the Palestinians. We have through ethnic cleansing. And that's the reality now. And that's why I'm with IPC. I am with IPC because that's it. There is no two states. I dream, it's a dream, it was a dream. There is no. This is the reality. Whether this reality will lead to Israel, to Jewish state, or maybe not. But that's the reality. I know, sadly so. I view the settler movement not only as anti-Israel, not only as a destruction of Israel, not only as the cancer that is slowly but surely is killing Israel, but also a source of anti-Semitism with who knows where this will lead. I view Israel today, and my fear that Israel today is becoming black hole for the Israelis and maybe for the whole Jewish people. That's number one. Comment number two. I'm not sure. There is always was a question, who is a Jew? You know that, and you know, from the past, we was governments, a lot of discussion in Israel and outside. I'm wondering, maybe go back to this discussion and ask the question, why not having Judaism as a religion and the rest are people? So in a way, I'm at the post-Zionism, in a way, agree with them, maybe just separate between the two, because that's the only way we can at least save the Jews, if not Israel. So that's number two. Now, I have other questions to you quickly. Because you were involved with Rabin and all of this, maybe the agreement, the peace agreement, there is something interesting that is related to what we are talking about now. It seems unrelated, but it is. There was a prime minister in Israel called Yitzhak Rabin, who was in the process, and very strong, and the whole government was in a process of peace with Palestinians. Then he's murdered. After his murder, the whole peace process just disappeared. After his murder, the one who is responsible for his murder, de facto, Mr. Netanyahu, is the prime minister of Israel for many years. Isn't it strange? Does it occur to you that there is something strange about it? What do you think about it? You probably have been thinking about it quite a bit. And how all of this is related to what we see now with the Meir Kahana's disciples managing Israel, that they are in charge, and they are in charge of destroying Israel as you know it. And so what is going on? Who is in charge in Israel? Who has been in charge in Israel? A prime minister was murdered. It's like in the United States, the parallel. Kennedy was murdered, and then his brother too. This is not something simple. I mean, it is a symptom of something very deep and very problematic for the Americans as for the Israelis. How do you view all of that? Thank you.
Excellent question.
We need another hour just to answer your important question. I would recommend you to read my book in Hebrew, Yad Ish Be'achiv, Retzach Rabin u'Milchemet HaTarvut B'Yisrael, which I published 10 years after the assassination of, that's the only book that I published in Hebrew, unfortunately, because I'm academic, most of my books are in English, but this one is in Hebrew, and you can find it. And I explained, I answer the questions there. I wrote it 10 years following the assassination. But let me, as we are getting to the end of our conversation, let me put some positive, optimistic viewpoint. Looking at the demonstrations that took place in the last 25 months, 25 weeks in Israel, you find a very interesting phenomena. Number one is that people are beginning to say we cannot have a democracy and occupation at the same time. That we didn't hear that. Only the extreme left-wing groups, parties, organizations spoke about the negative impact of the occupation on Israeli society. The majority of the Israelis didn't care about it. Today, you hear more and more Israelis who say the occupation is the cause of the destruction of Israeli democracy. And as so many hundreds of thousands of people are trying to keep Israeli democracy alive, we have to recognize the negative aspect of occupation. That's a wonderful development, very positive development. Second, to a lesser degree, there is also an acknowledgement that the role of religion in Israel is very negative. Most Israelis, not understanding the depth of it, say Israel is a Jewish state. And therefore, Israel should be Orthodox concept of Judaism. Only Orthodox concept of Judaism in Israel is legitimate. Even the reforms, which are the largest group among American Jews, are not recognized in Israel as legitimate. And now there is a beginning of an understanding that this deep connection between the state of Israel and religion is too negative, and there is a beginning of conversation of creation of new groups, new organizations, new demands to separate state from religion. The reason is that the ultra-Orthodox and the national religious groups who are so strong in this government put forward so many demands, and Netanyahu gave them because he's so weak, that many Israelis today say, hey, that's too much. Why should I have to spend 3 years of my life serving the military while my neighbor is going to study in a religious school in yeshiva and get money from the state? That's not fair. So there's more and more demands to change that. Whether it will help or not, I don't know. But the fact that Ehud Barak, who was the leader of the Labour Party, is now one of the most outstanding orators in these demonstrations, shows you that something is developing in Israel, and maybe it will bring a change. Hopefully, let's pray for it, not to him or to her. I don't believe in him or her, but let's pray to reason that it will happen.
Could you take 2 more questions, please?
Just quick question that you haven't answered yet is how come by murdering Rabin, they murdered the peace? And how come the chief murderer of Rabin became prime minister? What is behind all of that? Is there some secret here that we don't know, something that we should know, that you may know? That's my question.
No secret. Israeli society is deeply divided since 1967 on the issue of the territories and the relations with the Palestinians. It's not so much the economic issue or defense issue. It's a question of the collective identity. Who are we? What are we? What should be our relations with the world? What should be our relations with our neighbors and with the Palestinians? And Israeli society was split in the middle. And when Rabin took the courageous step, half of the people were against him. And later on, the Intifada started. I'm jumping 20 years forward. Do you know that the second Intifada in 2000, in the year 2000, let me correct myself. Netanyahu took over, but he was voting out, and the leader of the left, of the Labour Party, Barak was elected and he pursued the peace process, but he failed in the year 2000. Now, the year 2000, because of the failure of the negotiations in the year 2000, the second intifada started. And within 4 years of the second intifada, million young Israelis lived under terrorist attacks on their way to school, on their way to the university, on their way to coffee places. 1 million people. No wonder that these 1 million people said the Palestinians are all terrorists, there's no one to negotiate with, and they moved to the right. So after the second intifada, 1 million young people moved, 70 or 80% of them moved to the right and gave a very strong base to the right-wing camp in Israel. So the division between the two groups has changed and moved to the right. Add to that, of course, the ultra-Orthodox and the who were doves in the past, and to the national religious parties and supporters. So the pendulum moved to the right in the same way that it moved in other places in the world to the right for other reasons, which we don't have time to develop. But I believe that the historical processes are not straight on, but move from it is a pendulum movement from the left to the right, from the right to the left, and hopefully it will start to move to the left. So I'm still optimistic, and so you should be.
Professor Peri, can you take 2 more questions?
All right.
Okay, let's go to, oh, now there are more. Okay.
No, not more. So let them be short, and I will answer together to all of the 3.
Okay, so let's go to Mona, and then to Abed, and then Avi, and then Zohar. Just ask your questions shortly, and then Professor Peri will answer all of them. Mona.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Mr. Peri, for your patience with us. I'm very glad that you brought up the war in Ukraine, because international law doesn't guarantee that there are no crimes or no criminals. It only demands that there be accountability for those crimes and for those criminals. And we can ensure that law is respected by ensuring that there's accountability and that there is no impunity, whether it's Putin in Ukraine or Bush in Iraq. And I might add Blair, who was equally responsible for the aggression in Iraq and ended up being a UN peace envoy for Palestine and Israel, being a war criminal himself, the way Putin is a war criminal. So these are the ironies of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the question of impunity arises with Netanyahu in particular. He got so addicted to enjoying impunity at the international level for his international crimes that he's now seeking impunity for his national crimes, for his domestic legal violations.
What is the question, Mona?
Then the question is, if we allow that impunity, what is the consequence for Israel as well as for the Israeli-Palestinian peace? And I share your optimism, sir. I think the excesses will lead to a better outcome because of the excesses revealing what is wrong with the current reality.
Okay, the impunity to Netanyahu. Let's go to Abed. Please ask.
Yes. Hello, Dr. Peri. I just wanted to say, if in the beginning, correct the comment you said about the 6 million victim Jews, and my heart goes for them. But in the Israel, Weizmann, prior to that, prior to the 6 million, said in the peace conference in 1919, Palestine will be Jewish just like England is English. Am I correct? Now, there was a prior intention. Prior to the 6 million, there was a prior intention to take the land. And of course, everybody knows if the Palestinians were strong, they would have chosen another place to create their Zionist state. Now, having said that, we are right now, there are 7 million Poles in the same period that the Jews were killed, sadly. And there were Jews killed before that and tortured through centuries in Imperial Russia, in Europe. And so there is no denial about that. So right now, you cannot selectively give certain people certain rights, just like they say the chosen people, you know. We are all human beings, and we should be
What's the
treated
question?
under the same law.
No, it was clear. He was clear. He was clear. I will answer him.
Okay.
The question is that we are moving, the world order is disintegrating in front of our eyes. There is going to be restructuring of the world. And I myself, for the sake of the Jews and non-Jews, Christians, Muslims, the Palestinians, and the whole area, I think we should, one of the things we have to stop blaming the Holocaust and creation of Israel, because the Palestinians are not the one who did it. They are innocent from that. No, let's create a two-state solution as a beginning and then a dialogue. And because that's one of the arguments I have with our friend about his confederation, because I think there is too much ill feeling between the two sides. So if we start a step creating a two-state solution with an open forward progress based on this concept, IPCU. And then followed by eventually to one-state solution, because that the world is we do not want to wait where the things explode and more bloodshed and who knows what, really. But the world order, as we know it, it's disintegrating right now in front of our eyes, and we can also move on to solve the problems like of the Iraqis and the Syrians, and bring peace, and eventually these people could live together. Why not? We can, at one point in the future, it looks like I'm dreaming, but believe me, it is doable. The Jews
Right,
could
let's
just
go
move anywhere.
let's go to Avi and then Zohar. Please ask your questions briefly.
No, Abid just spoke, didn't he?
No.
Yeah, what do you think? Is it that possible?
No, that was Abid. Now
Right.
it's
Zohar.
Avi,
Now Zohar, the last one.
Avi
The last
Appelstein.
one will be Zohar.
And Avi Appelstein.
Avi, I see. Okay. All right.
Okay, good evening. I will keep it short. I would like to ask you, Professor Peri, I personally don't believe anymore that this two-state solution is feasible. It didn't happen till now, and it won't happen in the future. But behind that, I think that even if it would be feasible, it won't stop the conflict. I mean, the wish, like all the topics that was talking about, right of return and so on, the gap is too big. And now I ask you what your personal opinion about the next thought. That it will become a one state with two different identities. One state in the sense that both people have the feeling that they didn't have to give up anything. The settlers can stay in the West Bank or wherever they want. There won't be a movement of a free movement, at least not at the beginning, because the trust is not there, and trust have to be built. It's a long process. But the idea, for example, the Hamas wouldn't have any reason to attack Israel if they have already a kind of official part of this area. What do you think about something like that?
Okay, let's go to Zohar, because Professor Peri wants to answer all of the questions simultaneously. So Zohar, what is your question?
Yeah, thank you. Now, just a short version. I remember a joke that the last two Jews in Afghanistan were banned from Afghanistan because after the Taliban put them in prison, the guards couldn't stand there arguing anymore, so they let them go. Anyways, that joke aside, Mr. Peri, I very much thank you for your time. I'm just wondering, for those of us who are trying to promote a peaceful settlement, trying to combat the increasing level of racism within our society, Jewish Israeli society particularly, what do you advise? What advice do you have to try to advance it? How do you suggest that we bring about this change that is very much needed? Thank you.
All right.
I'm not sure I understood your question. Could you please?
Exactly. What is your solution to peace? How do you make
No,
peace?
no, not what is the solution for peace. We know what
But-
the solution is. The question is, how do we overcome? How do we mobilize people? What is best to try to spread the word about the viability of a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian occupation
within Israel, or in the world, or what?
within Israel? Considering the fact that we need Israeli society to agree with some kind of a solution that will come in the future, how do we spread the word and not, or try to diminish the idea of a massive backlash that we had back in '95 that spread or divided the country into very combative parts?
Okay.
What is the best way to go about it?
I understand. All right, let me start with Avi. It's quite interesting that there are 7 or 8 or maybe even more groups in Israel that analyze the situation like you do, namely that there is no feasibility to a two-state solution. And therefore, if we want to live in one state, we have to solve the problem somehow. All of them are interesting, very innovative, but odd. I don't have any other state that can be an example to these ones. I'll give you an example just regarding Jerusalem. How to solve the problem in Jerusalem? One of the groups said, let's divide the authority in Jerusalem or the sovereignty in Jerusalem in layers. One layer will be Jewish, another layer will be Palestinian. Where else in the world do you have layers of sovereignty? And there are some other solutions. One state for two. There are very odd solutions which did not succeed nowhere else in the world. Why should they succeed here? In this case, it has to be a simple solution. And the solution that is sound complicated is the simple one. Regarding Zohar, how to change the attitudes of the Israelis, that's a question that the progressive camp in Israel today is discussing all day long. Because what happened is that civil society in Israel has changed in the last several months because of the policies of the new government. And there is a lot of locomotion, a lot of anxiety, a lot of action. Groups are being divided. People are joining different groups. So the civil society is flourishing. But there is a gap between civil society and the political level. And the new ideas that are flourishing within civil society did not cross yet to the political level. I believe that if things will continue, there will be a major drama within Israeli political institutions. Parties might collapse, new parties might be created. People who are now leading the civil society might get to politics. There will be a change. We are in a revolutionary or pre-revolutionary period. How it will develop, I don't I can't say. Now to Abid, that's a very, very important point that I have to tell you, Abid. Of course, Zionism started before the Holocaust. What a question, we know that. We don't say that Israel was created because of the Holocaust. The Zionist movement began in the late 19th century. The Holocaust was in the middle of the 20th century. But the idea of Zionism was, as I said earlier, the idea that Jews have the right to their state. At first, they spoke about national homeland, then they spoke about state. But the Jews always were ready for a territorial compromise. In the 4, 5, 6 stages of the development of the Zionist movement, the Jews never said, there were some extremists, but the leadership of the Zionist movement always said we should get part of the territories. And unfortunately, the Palestinians said, no, it all belongs to us. That gave the strength to the Zionist movement compared to the Palestinian national movement. And the latest case was in 67. After 67, the Israeli government was willing to give back territories. And the reaction of the Palestinians and the Arab states was no peace, no agreement, no recognition of Israel. So unfortunately, you cannot say that it's because of the Zionism and the Zionists wanted to take the entire territory. Now, the most important question is a complicated and serious question is Mona's one. As I try to explain to you, the Israeli-Palestinian and before the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very complicated, very complicated. The Palestinians are fighting against Israel, or the Israeli-Palestinian war. There are two wars there. There is one war where the Palestinian demand is the right one, namely to end the occupation and to have a Palestinian state. But the other war that the Palestinians, and you shouldn't generalize, of course, the other war that the Palestinians fight is not against the occupation and for creation of a Palestinian state, but against the existence of a Jewish state. The first war is legitimate from the point of view of the Palestinian. The second one is not legitimate. And therefore, the Palestinian action is both guerrilla and terror. The international law says very simply, if an occupied people fight against the military of the occupier, it is a legitimate guerrilla. But if the occupant occupies fight against the civilians on the other side, that's not guerrilla, that's terrorism. Now, most of the Israelis see the Palestinians as terrorists. I see the difference between the two, and I'm in a minority. But the international law today, of the last 20 years, did not solve yet the problem of the asymmetrical warfare. What do you do against terrorist guerrilla organizations? The international law was created to solve the problems of war between states, the symmetrical warfare. The issue of asymmetrical warfare is still not clear, and the international system did not solve that problem. So you cannot say that the international crimes of Netanyahu. The international crime of Netanyahu, according to this concept, is letting Jews living in the occupied territories. This is not, it doesn't fit the international law. But the international crime of Hamas, for example, is that they bomb Israeli kindergarten and coffee places. It's not the same. It's not a balanced situation. And we have to be cautious when we use terms which are not balanced. I really appreciate the fact that all of you remained until now. I see 32 participants. So I wish your dedication to the topic, and I hope that you will be able to help us all to move forward to find solutions, whatever complicated they are, to the unfortunate problem that we are facing.
Okay, before I thank you, I want to make a closing remarks, and then I'll give you an opportunity for closing remark. A common government peace, in my opinion, it's the only way to make peace. And peace is the ultimate goal. It's the ultimate security. It is possible to create online election, and it can be done securely. Estonia is holding online election for 9.5 million people. One day of war between Israel and Gaza of $100 million could make this a reality. And I just want to reply to Professor Peri. A common government will not oppose Jewish or Palestinian self-determination. It's not contradicting Jewish or Palestinian self-determination. A common government will not increase or decrease the Jewish or the Palestinian population. Common government has nothing to do with population, and a common government could decide on a two-state solution. So these are the issues that I wrote down. I'll give you an opportunity, Professor Peri, to make your own a closing argument, and then we are going to adjourn for today.
Well, I almost did it, so I will say only one sentence or two sentences. That I appreciate your efforts. Secondly, that theoretically what you said now is reasonable. What I'm trying to explain is the perception of the Israelis. I don't know what the perceptions of Palestinians will be, but the perception of the Israelis will be that creating the confederation includes accepting the existence of independent Palestinian state. And I'm afraid that because of that, many Israelis will be hesitant to support your initiative.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all for, I'm sorry, Shlomo, I didn't give you another chance, but we were, so much, Professor Peri, for your time and generosity in asking and participating so diligently. And let's hope to see you in the next event, which will be a debate between me and Yoram Shefter. Thank you so much and have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.